the one lifetime I have,
Mhm.
I'm going to spend it, working on that.
So this is a tangible reality. This history is physical, just like the physical world we're living in right now.
Yes, it is our right as American citizens. It is public record, public information. You have every right to go into the National Archives for free. You do not have to pay, and they will pull those records for you for free. You don't.
Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And today I'm so excited to finally bring you an interview with Mr. Orice Jenkins. I've been meaning to bring Orice on here for probably a year. And Orice is like a true Renaissance man. He is a incredible jazz musician. He's a music teacher for children. He's also an incredible genealogist. And today he's going to help walk us through what Black homestead history looks like. And the reason that we connected was because I had been doing research on my fifth grandfather who was enslaved in Louisiana. And I was trying to reconnect and find like the plantation he was living on and the bricks that he made when he was enslaved. But that story didn't end there. He actually ended up suing for his freedom and he won. And then he was able to apply for a land grant as a free man of color. And I have those copies of those documents. And Reese was helping me find where that land was. Like, I wanted to find that land. And so I wanted to bring Maurice on and introduce him to you. And I'd love for you to go check out his website. It's oricejenkins.com, and I'll leave a link to it below. And I think he's ready to talk. So let's go over there and say hi. Love your music. I listen to your YouTube channel all
Oh,
the time.
thank you, Danielle.
Oh my
Oh, that's
gosh.
so nice.
That video with you and your uncle, I think it was your uncle. He was on the keys. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
You guys, you should have so many subscribers. Like, I want to send everyone over there because that's crazy.
thank you. I need to my YouTube. I've been neglecting, but I've been on YouTube for like basically since the beginning. So I'm just like, oh yeah, YouTube is there, but I wanted to put that up because there were no videos of my uncle, and
Yeah.
he's gonna be 92 this year. Um, so I'm like, this guy, he's been around like, like he knew Charlie Parker and he knew Thelonious Monk and Nat King Cole. I'm like, and people don't know about him. So I really wanted to do a video with him. Thankfully, he's still here. We did that years ago, but he's got more gigs than me. So
I love it. I grew up on jazz because his cousin played with Thelonious Monk. He played the sax, and we just grew up with those albums in the house. And so yeah, I just loved it. You guys are amazing. So I want to talk about all that. You do so much that I was trying to hammer down like the questions. I was like, you're a Renaissance man. I don't even know what direction to go to.
oh, right back at you. I mean, you've gone a long way from finding Lola. Well, my name is Orice Jenkins. I'm a human being, and all the things that I might find myself doing, I think are all part of the human experience. Things that we all can do. I don't think I'm particularly special because I can sing songs or read cursive from the 18th century. But these are things that I've learned throughout my life. I had a great public school system, and I just picked up a lot of fascinations, I'll say. Um, but yeah, my first career choice was music, and I did put out 4 albums, and in that process, I also loved studying the history of musicians. I would always find out where they're from, where their grandparents are from, if they have other musicians in their family, and that's how I got into genealogy. When I looked up, unfortunately, the great Whitney Houston passed away, and I looked up where her family was from, the Drinkard Singers, and they were from Blakely, Georgia, which is my grandma's hometown.
Oh wow.
And my grandma always told me Blakely was so small, it's not even on the map, which that was her phrase. It is on several maps, but that was her phrase. She would say it every day, and that's all she would say. So I didn't know anything about my people in Blakely. But
Mm.
when I saw that Whitney Houston was from there, I was like, okay, if Blakely is that small, I got to be related to Whitney Houston. Like,
Are
there's
you?
no. Yes, absolutely.
You
Blakely is
are?
that small.
Oh
Blakely
my
is that
goodness.
small. To the point where the only family history I ever knew was that my great great grandmother was actually shot by a stray bullet that came in through the window. Turns out that she was shot by Whitney Houston's first cousin, who she was married to at the time. And I shouldn't be laughing, but it's just the irony of it all that she ended up dying on the Drinkard family land that I had been trying to figure out where it was for so long. So
It's a small world, I think is what it comes down to. It's a small
yes,
world, especially here in America. If your family has been here 2, 3, 4 generations, we're probably gonna find something we have in common somewhere, which I love. You focus, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've been reading your stuff, like, for the past couple months because you're so good at finding your family or finding other people's family, like, you do a great job. The history of, like, Black homesteading or freedmen homesteading.
yeah, that was another surprise because it wasn't something I was thinking about before I was introduced to it by a great woman named Bernice Bennett, and she's been studying her own Black homesteading story for about 12, 13 years at least now. And basically, in the mainstream media, you might think of something like Little House on the Prairie when you think of homesteading or people out on the frontier, just squatting, settling their land, being out there in the middle of nowhere. And people don't realize there were lots of Black people um, in every homesteading state. Every single homesteading state, there were Black people there as well. On the frontier.
Mm,
Um, so the homestead states, basically in this country, are every state except for the 13 colonies and Texas. So think about how that area was already heavily settled at a certain point.
mm,
But when Jefferson bought, the was the Louisiana Purchase, and the country just got so much bigger, so much bigger. Obviously now it goes all the way out to the Pacific coast, and they needed they wanted people to go out and settle those lands.
mm,
Um, so Black people were there. I could say that about every part of American history.
right,
Black people were there,
right.
and I never learned about them being there in my growing up. But now I know we were there because our ancestors were those people.
It gives me chills and even emotional because again, I could see her looking like this and think, well, maybe I don't. It's interesting, but I don't have anything to do with it. And like as you've helped me find too, like uh, my family had everything to do with it. That's my history too. And I think sometimes it's somehow a hot button issue to say like Black history is American history. I know that's like a thing, but I promise almost anyone, even if you don't find an African American ancestor, you're going to find a connection to this story that impacts your family here. And so it has been humbling for me to do that. So I would, if you could explain a little bit more about that, because, for people who maybe don't love history as much as us, we got the Louisiana Territory before the end of slavery. There were people of color who were free, who were out there homesteading, because you have like these
Yeah,
dual realities happening in different
right.
parts of the country.
Yeah. Well, free people of color, that's a whole other conversation that I think is super important that I didn't realize again until I got into genealogy. That I think when the Civil War broke out, there were like 3 or 4 million enslaved people. Actually, I say 3 or 4 million Black people in America, but 10% of them, 300,000 people, were free already before the Civil War. So that's a decent amount of people that were already free, and a lot of them were landowners. A lot of them had businesses. So that's a whole topic that I don't see discussed very much, in mainstream history either. So your ancestor, and you've told that story, I think, on your channel before about how he even got his freedom, and but they went through a lot. Free people of color were not just, oh, there you're free. A lot of states, they had to actually report, and file as free people of color. They had to have their papers on them anywhere they went, or else they could be sold back into slavery. And then there were all the fugitive slave acts where people were coming into states to get, you know, escaped people back.
So you're just
So
in the, I mean, you may have nothing to do with that, but just by nature of how you look and you're free, there's a risk. What are some of the challenges maybe you faced researching this Black homestead history?
There's a lot of record loss. Like these areas, especially in the South and probably in the West too. Where some of those county governments had just started, but
Mm.
also in the South, a lot of the county courthouses were burnt. Um, say burnt with a T, because they were burnt to the ground, and with it, all the land records that would be in the deed books that would be in the courthouse. So when we have ancestors that have lost their homestead land, it's difficult to research how that happened, whether it was taken, whether they sold it, which is what I hope happened. But I
Mhm.
know that that's the reality is that something sinister might have happened, or whether they lost the land due to delinquent taxes, because maybe no one told them they had to pay taxes, or maybe some good, nice neighbor said, "Oh, I'll pay your taxes for you," and then they never did. And they, of course, it gets printed in the newspaper when you are delinquent, with your taxes. But if you can't read because 10 years ago you were enslaved and you weren't allowed to read, it might be kind of hard to read the newspaper and find out that so all these things, there are big ifs that I can't actually get the answers to because my homestead ancestors all lived in what we call burned counties where the courthouse records were burned up.
I've never heard that phrase. Can you tell me a story about those ancestors or maybe something you came across that was really you're like, "Wow, I wanna hold on to this. I love this."
Absolutely. And that's actually why these land records are so important as far as homestead records, because those are federal records. So those were not kept in the county courthouses.
Okay.
Those are in Washington, D.C. And I got one of my ancestors' land entry papers, which is her application to get the homestead. Turns out she died before she got her homestead, and she was actually able to her children were actually able to continue the homestead and finish the process because it's like a 5-year process at least. In her case, because she died, it took almost 20 years for them to finally get the patent to their land, because they get a patent, not a deed, a patent from the United States government signed by the president. um, so it took almost 20 years to get that. But within that, because they had to prove that they were her children and all these things, I got so much genealogical information from the file, even her death date, which, by the way, if you're a Black woman that died in 1888 in rural Alabama, you're not going to have a death certificate. That's
Mm.
just not a thing at that time for those people. Not even a gravestone anywhere. But I have her death date because of her land application.
So tell me, have you been to that land? Do you know where it like, you know where it is? Have you been there? Does the family still have it? What happened to it?
I just came back from the land, actually. I was there last month. Actually, probably a month ago. It was right before, I was just there, and it was great because, I had been there before, but not knowing what I just told you. So, I knew I had some family I had a whole community of family members that lived in this area. So, I knew I had one ancestor there. Now I found about 7 ancestors that live right in that same area that did. Um, I don't think any of them still have the land. Some of them do actually because um, there's actually the area is named after one of the family members, their last name. So it's yeah, and they founded, like, they started churches
Mhm.
there, so that means they also have cemeteries there. So one of the cemeteries is still on the land, that one of my relatives owned, and that land is still in the family. So it was beautiful to be down there.
Yeah, tell me how it felt going there. I think sometimes, because I've had some failed tries at, like, trying to reconnect to land, and I think you bring a lot to it sometimes, and I wanna go and have, like, this I don't even know what it is, but I'm expecting something. It doesn't always happen like that, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's still good to go. Can you tell me what your expectations were before you went the first time, and, like, was it what you thought it would feel like? How'd that
That's
feel?
so funny you mentioned that because now I remember in one of your videos you talked about that when you went to Louisiana and were expecting to feel something, and I had just had a similar experience. This is probably over a year ago when you made that video, but I remember watching you kind of go through that and feeling the same thing. Um, it's weird to me. I have to have like associations with things to understand things. So if I'm just like in, Alabama, and I'm like, okay, I don't really, I've never been here before. Um, my grandmother didn't even know that her family came from Alabama. All she knew was Blakely, Georgia. So it's not like I have any history that I've heard about it. If my grandma knew, she just didn't tell me because there's a lot of stuff she didn't tell me. And I know you have that in common too. But um, it was cool to be there. Talking about the first time I went now,
Mhm.
just 2 years ago, it was cool to be there, but I didn't really feel much of anything. I knew it was amazing to be there. I knew I was in pretty much the right place. Um, Also, I'm always going to the courthouse just to try to gather whatever I can that wasn't burned. So I'm thinking about records, not thinking about land so much. Um, but this last time I went, it was um, it was a lot more meaningful because I had a lot more information, 2 more years of information where I'm seeing, okay, I know where all this land, what it used to be, thinking about the community that was created, because it wasn't just my ancestor. And I know you've talked to Elizabeth Shown Mills before. She created that fan club, friends, associates, neighbors. So when you think about that land, all the people in that area, they all, just how like you might walk with one of your siblings now, they walked together back then on that land, and it's amazing what you can find just thinking about the neighbors. So because I had that whole community in my mind, and went to the churches, the churches was a big thing back then. The churches, the land, the water, any streams or creeks, that might be how they traveled, or where they got their nourishment from. Those That context made it much more meaningful for me this time.
Because I feel like there's this, it's probably just me, but like I feel like I have like this eternal kinship now to this property, and I want to be able to be a part of it, and we have to realize, okay, sometimes you can't go. But you helped me find the so my fifth grandfather got. I'm not as articulate as you are in this area because I'm still trying to understand that. But I saw that the president did sign his land grant, so I'm assuming it's what you were saying. Um, and he got his property, and you were able to help me find it because when you're looking at these land grants, they're not giving a street address. There isn't a street address, even if there was, it's going to change. They're giving coordinates usually, or very antiquated ways of measuring. And you were able to help me find that. So I just want to thank you
Yeah.
in person, first
Oh,
of all. It's just amazing.
my pleasure. No one did that for me. So, and I had my land patent for about 7 years before I finally paid attention to Bernice Bennett, who I'd been listening to for also 7 years, but hadn't looked at the land patent she was showing. I was like, wait, I have that. And then I realized I could find where my ancestors' land was too.
Maybe this is something that's connected or not, but for people who aren't super familiar with African American or Black American history, I think there's a phrase that a lot of people do know. It's this 40 acres and a mule phrase. How does
Mm.
this connect to what we're talking about? Is this the same thing? Is it something different?
It's actually a really good question. And it's a question that we get all the time. Speaking of the homesteader descendants, that, because people do think, oh, that's what it is, right? It's the same thing. And it does have some similarities, but the 40 acres and a mule comes from General Sherman, who was a Union Army general in Georgia. I believe he marched from Atlanta to Savannah, and throughout his way, I'm sure he was also burning things down, and that's why some of courthouses might be burned in Georgia as well. But they were also trying to confiscate lands from the Confederates, from the slave owners that were in Georgia. Um, and that land was supposed to be repurposed and divided up and given to freedmen. And freedmen is the term we use for people that were formerly enslaved, but then became freed. Um, at some point between 1863 and 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified. So that's what was supposed to happen, and that was what supposedly President Lincoln, wanted to happen. He wanted these lands to be redistributed to Black people. But then there was a situation in a theater, and President Lincoln, unfortunately, was mortally wounded. the next president, which I believe was President Johnson, he immediately repealed that 40 acres and a mule, and the land that had some of it had been given out was given right back to the
Mm,
slave owners, former slave owners. So that is a separate thing,
right.
but a similar concept to the Homestead Act of 1862, which also President Lincoln is the one that signed that. And so that was 1862. And although it was only open to free people, of course, that's only 3 years before the end of the Civil War. So um, it was open to anybody that was free. Also, anybody that hadn't, taken up arms against the United States, and you had to be over 21, the age of 21, and the head of your household to apply.
That's
So
amazing. It's a
yeah,
you are such a wealth of knowledge. I feel like you explain that so much better than I could. 'Cause sometimes I'm like, I want to make a video about something. I'm gonna make this real hard to understand. Like,
no,
that was
you do a great job of
uh,
explaining things. I learn a lot on your channel.
well,
Um,
I appreciate it because this I learned like 200 things in 20 minutes just now from you.
yeah.
Can you tell me, talking to your family, even your older, you're talking about your uncle, he's in his 90s. So I'm sure you've been sharing this journey with them and kind of what you're finding. And, I'm sure some family members are more excited than others because some people don't care as much. Um, but can you tell me about how it has been received and how your family has, like, how has it been for them to kind of find out this history that was almost lost if you hadn't saved it?
Well, first I got to find the family. It's, it's my homesteading side. I didn't know that side of my family at all.
Mm,
And so I've been reaching out to them over the past couple of years and telling them, "Hey, we our ancestor owned 160 acres of land," and they're like, "Oh, okay." In Alabama, um, because they left Alabama and lived in Georgia for 50 years, sharecropping. So it was a totally lost history. And I'm like, yeah, and guess what, guys? I put it in a book, and it's it's a book that's you can buy it Barnes and Nobles or whatever. And then I think the coolest moment was when Bernice Bennett invited us to join her on stage at the African American Museum of History and Culture. I was able to invite some of my family to that, so they were actually able to see us, on stage talking about exactly what I'm telling you, and that was, I think, a pretty powerful moment for them. Um, it's also kind of confusing because I'm a Georgia researcher. That's my jam. That's my place. That's my spot. Um, Georgia was not a homestead state. It was one of the 13 colonies.
right.
But my family lives right on the border of Alabama and Georgia. So my people were crossing over that river, which is the
Mhm.
state border, to get this land. So when I even bring in Alabama, my family's like, "What? In Alabama? We're from Georgia." um, so trying to, and then discovering through DNA matches, I have even more homestead ancestors who I didn't even know I'm related to. That's been a whole journey too, because I'm like, okay, we're family. Clearly, the DNA does not lie.
Right.
Um, so going on that journey with them, who are literally strangers, but literally, when you share 75 centimorgans of DNA with somebody, it's not an accident,
Right.
So
That's right, that's
it's
right.
been pretty rewarding.
I'm so thankful for you. I feel like you are saving so much history and you're so passionate about it. And I feel like fist bump, like thank you, because some people are I think there's like maybe a resurgence a little bit where people are, taking these tests, they're trying to figure out who am I? And then they realize, oh, the test doesn't tell you who you are. This is
Right.
the first step in a lifelong journey of doing this. Um, what what do you feel like are some untapped areas of research when we're talking about maybe it's the Black homesteading, maybe it's just you're a very prolific researcher, but what do you feel like are some untapped areas that if you had two more lifetimes, like you would like to delve into? Because we all know there's never enough time to do it all. So
Ooh, you got that right. Um, I think the next thing that I'm getting into is kind of a somber thing, but it happened in my hometown, my grandmother's hometown, Blakely, Georgia, which is a race massacre. These are things that happened. It seems like in so many towns that we just don't talk about. People we know about Tulsa now. People know about Rosewood, Florida. People know about Elaine, Arkansas, Chicago, the Red Summer of Chicago. But in Blakely, Georgia, a very, very similar event happened, and that's what my next book is about. That will be out this summer. But as I'm researching that, I'm just like, wow, there's so many layers to these massacres, and just how in all those cases it's like the same thing. The only people put on trial were the black people, um, who weren't the ones doing the massacre. None of the white people that murdered these folks were ever arrested, tried, or anything. And in a lot of these cases, and it's often black families that were targeted for their wealth. So it's a black land ownership, even though this is in Georgia, so it wasn't homestead land ownership. But the people in my book, they owned 700 acres of land,
Mm,
and so there's a lot of that Reconstruction era jealousy. When all the black folks were, they were taking advantage of their full citizenship.
mm,
Um, so just that whole era of from Reconstruction to Jim Crow, where these lynchings and these race massacres were happening, that's something that I feel like should be talked about a lot more. And if I'm just discovering this massacre, um, and I'm just one person, but I know there's got to be more, and
mm.
there's almost nothing. My book's going to be the first book about this. Um, so I'm kind of trying. I'm thinking about like, okay, I need to go to Tulsa and see, what did they do to help, find where the victims are buried, get them markers. There are no headstones for these people. How do you get this information out to their descendants? I've been trying to do that. That's going to take my entire lifetime. The one lifetime I have,
Mm.
I'm going to spend it, working on that probably.
That's beautiful. I want to help you. So you have two books. Is well, you have that one. You have the new one coming out. Where can people get those? Should they just go to your website? Because I was going to put a link to that, obviously, but I don't know if that's the best way or if it's easier to be like on Amazon because they're in a warehouse somewhere. Or how do you? What's
Yeah,
best?
whatever's easiest for whoever. Thankfully everything goes everywhere these days.
That's
So
right.
if you go to my website and click collaborations, you'll see lots of things. In fact, you might see this video
Mm.
on there,
Okay, good.
but you'll see the books that I've done. And also music that I've done with other people, like because the book that I did with Bernice Bennett,
Mm.
she's the spearhead of that book, Black Homesteaders of the South. But it is on Amazon. It's also on Arcadia Publishing, which they have the great imprint called the History Press, which is great for
Hmm.
local history.
I love that.
And my book will be with them as well on the Early County, Georgia massacre. So
Yeah.
that's Arcadia, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all the things.
All of them. All of them.
Yeah.
What advice could you give to people who maybe they're not numerically young, but maybe they consider themselves young historians or like new genealogists who want to explore this history in their family or they don't know it's there and they think it might be there or it's like, where do you begin now that you looking back, like what advice would you give yourself starting out on this journey?
Mm. I would say it gets easier and easier every day for researchers, I would say, of our generation that are, I guess, younger as we as we get older. We are
Right, right.
still younger than a lot of people doing interested in the stuff. And there's so much you can do online now that even when I started, some stuff that was only on microfilm just a
Mhm.
few years ago is now online.
Right.
I would always say make sure you find the original record. There are great books and resources and videos out there, but try to find that original record and read it for yourself and get your own interpretation of what it might mean. That's the most important thing I would say because we can do that now. I don't have to go to a courthouse in the
Mm.
middle of nowhere. I can go right to my computer and look up that original record. So I always find the source because people repeat things and they repeat things wrong.
That's right. They sure do, and sometimes on purpose. Like, to get the information, yeah, yourself. The records, there's something if you haven't started this journey, but you're interested, finding some of those records, I had to kinda I showed up at the land and I wanted to feel more, and I felt the first time that I did, but seeing some of the records, it hit me like a brick wall. Like, seeing the signatures of people, oh
Yes.
my goodness, it's like you feel like people are reaching out to you from the other side. They're like, they
Yeah.
were real people, they wrote their name just like you, and here's what they were doing on that, that Monday morning. This is what was happening, and I don't know, it never
It's
gets
funny
old.
you say that because I found a signature in my ancestor's land entry paper. I did not know this man could write because he was born in 1826,
Oh,
enslaved. I did not know he could write, and it looked almost like he had just learned how to write. And I saw his signature and I was like, I have to put this in the book. So I don't have a picture of any of my ancestors that were homesteaders, but I put his signature. I had my graphic designer who did all my CD covers.
mhm.
I had him retrace so that it would look nice and clear, and we put that in Bernice's book. So
Uh,
I feel like I got to, hold his hand, or just especially when you touch the original land entry papers in DC, because those are the same ones that it's the same papers that were literally touched by your ancestors. So you need to do that too, because your ancestors' papers, even though
Folklore.
he got his land under the Land Act of 1820, still though the same very similar process, and his application is going to be in DC, which might be easier to get to.
I never thought about that. It hasn't even crossed my mind till this second. I'm so
Yeah.
weird about that stuff where I'm like, because like I want to touch the bricks that I thought he possibly made when he was enslaved. Like, I want that connection because I think the family stories are great. All of it is so intangible. And then you realize, oh no, this is a tangible reality. This history is physical, just like the physical world we're living in right now. And there's pieces left
Yes.
over. I gotta go do that. I'm gonna go do that. I don't know how. I'll have to email you.
I'm
Like,
here to help you.
I want to do that because I want other people to do that, to know this is a right, if unless it's not, I don't know, correct me, but that we're allowed to go to these places and interact with this history that's our history.
Yes, yes, it is our right as American citizens. It is public record, public information. You have every right to go into the National Archives for free. You do not have to pay, and they will pull those records for you for free. You don't have to pay. Also, if you cannot get to DC, because some people are really, really far, they will, for a fee, they will scan it for you and send it to you. So there are ways to get these records that I'm so thankful for the archives of this country. In every state, there are so many incredible archives, and they keep such good care. I was just at the Georgia archives a few weeks ago. I was in tears at how good care they kept of these records that my ancestors had touched 100 years ago. For you, we're talking about 200 years ago that your ancestor had touched. And even some of those court documents that you were finding, those are still around somewhere. So you can go and put your hands on those too. It's our right. Some courthouses will tell you, especially if you look like me, they will tell you, no, sir, you cannot touch the records. But that's not true. So I always try to ask again, say, can I speak to your boss or whatever? I have a public right, to view these records. So
This feels
you
really
hopefully don't have
important.
that problem.
We'll see. I'll go with my hair relaxed. I'll be like, "Can I touch all these papers?" I
Yeah.
I feel like this is so important. I don't know how I've never really articulated this or thought about it. It's because I guess it's because you did it. You did this. What it would feel like for people to not to just, I don't know. I think we're such a digital generation now that maybe people don't even realize the power and the romance of holding the original. My One of my cousins, I had a photograph of Lola's brother that I loved. It was online, and he had the original. And it's real
Mhm.
small. And I saw him in Louisiana a couple months ago, and he gave it to me. And like, this was the original. The guy had written his name on the back, and like having the original, I was like, "Are you sure? Like, are you sure, sure, sure?" Because there's no backup, you know. And I
Right.
have it, and it's like a priceless possession to me because I feel like I love the digital copies of stuff, but when you realize, like, there was a time where the original is all you got. That's all you got, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of value, and some of it has survived. This
Mhm.
is like, it's amazing. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna do that, and I want more people to do. I'm so thankful for you. You were like lighting a fire under me, which is good and bad. My husband's always kind of like, okay, now where are we going? Because I'm like, we have a new thing we got to go do. He's like, who'd you talk to? I'm like,
Right.
well, but it's beautiful, and I want to send some people to your website, and I want. Can people pre-order your book? Are you doing that, or like, do they how does that work?
Not yet, but
Okay,
there will be some pre-order available. I don't know when this video will come out, but hopefully soon
okay,
there will be pre-order. So it'll be on my website,
okay.
and I'll make sure to update you as well.
So grateful to get this out in front of people, and what you're doing is so important, and I'm so thankful for
Thank
it.
you. How
So
about
thank
this I'm
you.
doing for your ancestor? I think that all that he went through really should be known. I mean, there could you could write a book about Noel.
Yeah, I don't know.
Look at what life. I mean, and now that you can go to this land, even it's going to look totally different, but still take a picture of it and really think about, for a fact that your ancestor owned this very spot and was the original. I often say the original non-indigenous, but the original legal owner of that parcel of land. Those trees were cleared by your ancestor, and the labor of Black people is often disregarded. So I want to acknowledge your ancestor for his hard work. That's the reason why I specifically said I need to show you how to look at this land.
Thank you. It's amazing, and I think a lot of people who I think wouldn't have been interested or connected to this kind of history, they're coming in. They're coming in. I think
Yeah,
it's a much more united front of this is our history, and we got to keep it all. And so,
right.
thank you for what you're doing, Maurice. And I'm going to reach out at some point and talk about the archive stuff because I feel like that's something worth doing, so thank you. I'm, like,
Absolutely.
really excited now. I think that's, like, a gr I love when I talk to people and I'm like, "I'm ready to go and go do anything," so I appreciate you.
Awesome. Good.
Thank
Do
you
it.
so
You got
much.
it.